These are the top 10 attacking patterns every chess player should know on Grandmaster Igor Smirnov. Let's rock and roll. In this position it is black to play, and most players would probably just castle automatically without even thinking about anything else. However, there is an important thing to notice here. Your opponent's king is in the middle of the board, which brings us to the first attacking pattern, attacking an uncastled king. And the key idea here is to open up central files. Since your opponent's king stands right there, this is what you want to do. You want to open up the position so that you can attack the king directly right after that. And with that in mind, black played pawn to d5, trying to blow up the center. Since the c4 pawn is pinned and also attacked, white cannot capture it because that would lose a queen. Otherwise, white decided to defend this pawn, and now black keeps asking himself the very same question: how to open up these central files? And he sacrificed the pawn. What for? Well, after queen captured the pawn, now black brings the rook into play, which also brings us to another relevant idea. You want to be quick, since it's very easy for your opponent to get his king out of the center. You want to attack with a tempo, not giving your opponent any free time. And white was also very creative. He played bishop takes c6 counterattack, checking the king, but once the king is moved, white is facing the same trouble. Their queen is still hanging. He tried to block the file, but black came up with an absolutely stunning rook sacrifice, finally opening up the central position directly, and now queen takes e2 is a beautiful checkmate. Here Fischer demonstrates one of the most classical and important rules of attack: eliminate defenders. Usually your opponent either has this fianchettoed bishop near to his king, and very often they also have a knight on f6, which guards a whole lot of squares around his king, but not this time. Therefore, there is only one major defender, that bishop on g7, and Fischer played bishop h6 to trade it off. Black goes knight d7, developing this knight, and now Fischer demonstrates the second, also very important rule of attack: outnumber. You want to have more pieces in the area of attack. And now it's nice to see that for white, he actually has pretty much all of his pieces right there on the king side where he wants to attack the king. However, black was also resourceful. He's trying to trade off everything to slow down the attack. However, even in the endgame, Fischer continues pushing. He goes pawn h5, and now since all black's pieces are on the queen side, it is very clear that white's advantage in quantity of attackers is very overwhelming. Nevertheless, black goes queen d8, perhaps trying to go some play queen f8 and offer an exchange of queens. White played knight g5, threatening queen takes h7 mate. Black goes knight f8, and even though white attack is very strong, but it's still not easy to break through. And here Fischer used a pretty cool tactical shot: bishop to e4. His advantage in attackers is so huge that he's even willing to give up a bishop just for a pawn to just keep going with no slowing down. And the idea here is the bishop takes aim at these pawns, ready to potentially maybe sack the knight, capture this pawn, and destroy black's king that way. But if the bishop sacrifice is accepted, then it allows white to bring their final dormant piece into the attack. And now within a couple checks, white gets it done. The next thing is rather a pattern of thinking to find correct moves. In this case, white is ahead in development. White has completed his development while black still needs to do some work right there, and white wants to attack. But how do you do that? Here's the thing: focus your attention on opponent's side of the board and try to move your pieces forward onto opponent's side of the board and create threats. Good news, usually there are very few moves that are even theoretically available, and white played one of them, bishop to h5. Now, what's up with this move? Well, it actually creates a tactical threat of knight takes e6, due to the fact that now this pawn is pinned. So if black plays whatever, I'll just illustrate, knight takes e6 is coming because the pawn is pinned, and that will be very strong. So what can black do now? Of course he can trade, but that white just brings the queen into the attack, and that is all good. In the game, black decided to defend this pawn by going queen to c4 and use that way. However, white nevertheless sacrificed the knight right there, still following the same idea: go to his side of the board, make threats, and also open up the center. Remember that first pattern of attacking an uncastled king? You want to open up central files, and that is what white is trying to do right here. After queen captures, white brought one more piece into black's territory, and now knight to c7 is a really deadly threat with a whole lot of threats. And the issue for black is if he trades it off, that only helps white to open up the e-file. The queen is attacked on the next turn while play rook e1, attacking everything. This bishop cuts the king off, and white is winning easily. This example is probably even more relatable. It's from one of you guys. Henry sent me an email stating that he's progressing in chess, winning some local tournaments, and that was one of the games which I thought is a good illustration of this principle, and also the next one. Here's the thing. Think about this. It is white to move. How would you think about this position? There is the usual way of thinking when you start looking at the pieces that you have and asking yourself where should they move. And while it makes sense, it is also somewhat confusing because there are so many options and how to pick one. There is also a much more aggressive and more advanced way of thinking when you flip the script and you instead ask yourself a different question. You focus your attention on opponent's side of the board and you ask yourself, how do I go there and create threats? In that case, you limit the number of options that you have and you find right moves very easily. So here Henry played queen to e7, which is a very nice idea, bringing the queen forward. And after black delivered this check and then captured the pawn, which is a blunder because white's got one more attacking move, which brings us to the next attacking pattern, which I call CCTV scan, when you're scanning the board for checks, captures, and threats. And because those are forcing moves and they're the most powerful. Here white's got queen to d8, check, and although black can easily cover, which he did, that also drops this knight on f6, which would be a capture. Even though white missed this move in the game, he still played another move forward with some psychological threat of knight to e7, which was enough to scare black, and he played queen e7, and at this point white captured the knight and black just resigned. Now white is up a piece, he threatens something like knight e5, queen takes f7 and whatnot, and white is winning. A puzzle a day keeps losses away. It's time for a little challenge. If you can find the winning shot for white here, please write it down in comments below. And by the way, if you want to learn to find tactics and calculate it through even in Blitz, I've got a free masterclass about that. Link is in the description if you're interested. Even Magnus Carlsen fell victim to the next attacking pattern. In this case, Carlsen was playing white and he played pawn to c4, which is a blunder. While we attack opponent's pieces, we naturally expect them to retreat. However, the next tactical pattern is a counterattack. Here black played bishop b4 check. And that basically sets a really bad thing for white because the knight cannot cover because black's got a knight and bishop both controlling that. But the issue is if white covers with a bishop, there is a really strong move here. In the game, black traded bishops and still won the game after that, but there was an even stronger move, yet another counter blow, knight to e3, counter-attacking the queen and taking advantage of the pin. Therefore, the bishop cannot take it because it's pinned down to the king, and otherwise the queen is attacked and therefore it needs to move somewhere, and now black is totally dominating with this monstrous knight on e3. Moreover, an attempt to deliver this double attack will fail to yet another counter strike. In this case, black is ready to give up the bishop on b4 temporarily because there is a nice follow-up with the knight to c2, forking the king and queen and winning the game. In the next example, the white king is exposed. However, it's pretty easy for white and pretty quick to bring the king back to safety. For instance, white can play something like rook to f1 and then retreat the king back to g1 with this artificial castling. In the game, though, he decided to first kick this queen out here. Perhaps he was worrying about these knight jumps supported by the queen, and so he was hoping for the queen to go. But black used the motif we talked about before, a counterattack. Knight to d3. Checks the king and therefore ruins white's plan to retreat to g1 someone in the future. White played king to g3 and it still looks pretty safe for white right here. However, it also brings us to the next attacking pattern, called momentum. You gotta try to attack with every move that you play, otherwise your opponent will have some free time and will simply bring his pieces into play or retreat the king back to safety. Alekhine sacrificed the queen, and it turned out that after that, black keeps attacking this exposed king and it quickly turns it into a real nightmare. Usually a chessboard is as cluttered as my garage, and the only way to make it work is to declutter it, which means in chess to sacrifice material to open up the position, especially around your opponent's king. With that being said, white sacrificed the rook on g5 to remove these pawns around the king and get access to the king directly. Black cannot accept the sacrifice, as in this case, queen to f8 is a sudden checkmate supported by the rook. Therefore, instead, black tried to run away with the king. He played king to f7, still having this pawn shooting the king. However, white didn't stop and sacrificed another rook to totally open up the position around the king, and now it's very easy to attack it, and within just a couple moves, it led to a checkmate. The next pattern is extremely common on advanced level, however, is almost totally overlooked on beginner level. Here's the idea. If you see a position like that with opposite side castlings, the idea that comes to mind is, okay, since we have this situation, let's attack each other's king. So black is going to try to attack right there somehow, and white will maybe try to push the pawn forward, open up the h-file, and attack on the king side. That's how we typically think about positions like that. However, there is a problem with that. Think about it, let's say from the white perspective. How can white realistically create a threat? And then it's not that simple, right? You gotta push the pawn forward, and then you can't push it there because of this pawn and knight, right? So you have to like prepare, right? You have to play h4, bishop e2, maybe then h5, supported by the bishop, then take it with a pawn, and even after that, we've already made a whole lot of moves, so there's still not a single threat black can just recapture. So basically it's gonna take 10 moves, maybe more, to just create a single threat, which even then can possibly be defended against by black. And therefore, there is a solution which is much more effective. It is to attack in the middle of the board. So if you focus your attention right in the middle, and also into this large center, and you ask yourself, how can I do something there? That proves to be much more effective and also much easier to pull it off because you can start doing something active there right away with no preparation. And black played knight to g4, which starts putting pressure in the center. It attacks this bishop potentially, also opens up this bishop, and maybe something like pawn to d4 will become possible in the future with some double attacks. Also, the f-file is now opened for the rook. Maybe even e5 will be possible to keep attacking right there, and even though it's not clear exactly what black will do on the next turn, you can see that he is putting pressure and something is in the air. White played bishop d4 trying to offer an exchange, but black instead played e5, opened up the center, and white lightheartedly captured it, but he was lost anyway, and now bishop h6 suddenly used the pin to win the queen. And you see that this attack was so quick and so effective. Rook on the second rank usually leads to a very strong attack. In most cases, your opponent's got a lot of pawns there, which are easy targets for your attack, plus the rook also cuts off your opponent's king, which also creates many interesting tactical opportunities. In this position, it was black to play, and Capablanca played pawn to e5. For us mere mortals, it is usually the first move of the game, but when Capa plays it, it is basically the last move. White could have safely resigned right here, because after bishop captures the pawn, this allows black to enter the second rank with his other rook, now threatening the pawn on f2, and if white tries to defend it, then it leads to a big bang. Queen takes e3, sacrifice of the queen, and now angry rooks get the job done. Capablanca was one of those rare geniuses who made chess look simple, and if you want to know Capablanca's secret strategy, check out this video and you'll see exactly how he did it.